When we see something that is not right, not fair, not just, we have a moral obligation to say something, to do something. Hello, and welcome to the second in a series of productions by SIS, Women Seeking Insights for Solutions. They're an interest group of University Women of Flagler, a nonprofit organization that supports education in Flagler County. What you're about to see is the result of interviews and conversations between multiple pairs, consisting of a black man and a white man, about their experiences with racism. Each pair volunteered to take part in our project. Our intention is to explore and understand the impact that racism has had on our lives from each other's point of view. We have learned about the negative impacts that racism has on us. A set of questions was developed to guide the discussions. The recordings of the conversations were summarized and written up by each of the participants. The 4 men in this video who were part of the project have volunteered to record this video. They may or may not be telling their own actual experiences, but these are the real, lived experiences of one of the many participants. These vignettes highlight how racism, systemic or individual, negatively impacts all of us, black and white. Following the video, we invite you to join us in an open discussion about what you are about to see and hear. We hope you will learn from it. Thank you in advance for your time and consideration. Gentlemen, first of all, we would like to thank you in advance for your participation in this project. Please describe, if you would, the neighborhood in which you grew up and the relationships you had with your neighbors.
I had what I consider an average childhood. I lived in mixed neighborhoods and attended integrated schools. After high school, I took a trip from Ohio to Tennessee to visit a college. On my way down, my bus passed through Memphis, Tennessee, and I saw a sign for a colored YMCA. As I recall, that was my first exposure to institutionalized racism. I do remember thinking, what in the hell am I doing here?
I grew up in a poor Irish family. The only rentals we could afford were near even poorer black neighborhoods that we considered rough and dangerous. There was no overt hostility, but my older brothers told me not to go there because of vague ideas about danger. I guess that was kind of a passive racism.
I grew up in an all-Black community on the west side of Greenwood, South Carolina, a small town of about 20,000 people. It was a low-income but close-knit community where everyone knew everyone. I had many adopted mothers, stay-at-home moms during the day, and in the evenings, the working mothers, often as domestics, would take the night shift, looking out for kids who played in and outside each other's homes. I still have friendships from that experience.
I was born in the Bronx and moved at age 3 to Elmhurst, Queens, New York. My father was an immigrant from Czechoslovakia and my mother's parents from Ukraine. Elmhurst was primarily a white Anglo-Saxon community. I do recall Nazi parades that alarmed me and my parents occurring in the neighborhood. In elementary school, I found my experiences daunting, being harassed early in life for being Jewish.
I was born in Massachusetts, but within a year of my birth, my family returned to my father's home in Woodville, Mississippi. That was my mother's first time away from her home in Boston. Although I was only 6 months old and too young to be aware of the event, one of my mother's first encounters with overt racism greatly impacted my early years. One day, my mother went to the local general store to purchase material to make a dress. My mother was an accomplished seamstress. She disagreed with the local clerk on the quality of the goods she was shown, and in the view of the clerk, sassed or spoke impertinently to her. After my parents returned home, word came that the Ku Klux Klan was planning to visit them that evening in retaliation for my mother's impertinence. My parents gathered what belongings they could and fled to Memphis with me in tow. We got away just a short time before the Klan arrived. Thus began what was to become a rather nomadic life.
I spent the first 17 years of my life in Whitefield, North Carolina. Many of my relatives lived in very close proximity to us. The church that most of us in the neighborhood attended was just 2 or 3 minute walk up the road from my home. I grew up in the 50s and 60s. Although I lived in a community with strict segregation, I had contact with white people every day. Black people could not live in white neighborhoods, but whites sometimes lived in Black neighborhoods. I lived in a Black neighborhood where the residents owned their own homes. The only exception was a rental property that a white person owned next door to my home. The white owner quite often rented the property to white tenants. Occasionally, those renters would have serious issues, such as alcoholism and spousal abuse. My mother often sheltered, cared for, and fed the wife and children of the abuser. Still, while white society there still considered us less than, we maintained our position in that neighborhood. Although we played and interacted with white kids that lived in the house next door, we still lived segregated lives and attended segregated schools. We all stood together by the side of the road to wait for the school bus. One bus picked up the white kids who lived next door and took them to Whiteville High School. Another bus picked up the Black kids and took us to Central High School. I had very positive interactions with my teachers. This was unlike the experience of Black students that I knew who attended the integrated schools in Philadelphia.
Gentlemen, your next question is, thinking back on your educational history, describe memorable interactions with your teachers throughout your educational career.
I attended a predominantly Black high school outside my area in order to avoid the local gangs. My friends told me not to take any bull from the Blacks. I got along with the Black students, but in my senior year, I got into a fight. Our fathers were called in and the dean asked us to shake hands. Knowing that my father was extremely prejudiced, I refused to shake hands and quit school and joined the Navy. If my father hadn't been in the room, I would have shaken hands.
The first experience with racism that I remember was in the 8th grade. In order to see the board better, I always sat in front of my classes. My history teacher, Mrs. Parks, never called on me, even though I always raised my hand to answer questions. I believe the reason she ignored me was because I was Black. She didn't want me in the class in the first place and made it clear by her refusal to acknowledge me. However, she could not ignore my performance on the test. I aced the class. But I had good experience with others. One football coach would routinely invite the whole team to parties at his home. In hindsight, I realized that was probably risky on his part because of how his neighbors might react. Regardless, he never separated Black and white players.
My teachers were very supportive and encouraging of my dream to become a lawyer. No one ever said to me that they thought I should be a cook or something else. In college, the professors kind of humiliated you if you didn't have the answers. They made you look foolish to make a point. They did that to the Black students in the class, and I felt offended by that. I really liked that there was more diversity in that class, but I felt that it didn't really provide the support that they should have provided for people with different education or people of different cultures. The dropout rate was higher for students of color than it was for whites because the whites had, frankly, more support.
While my segregated school had its advantages, a major drawback was funding. Our facilities were substandard, and the textbooks that we had to buy were old hand-me-downs from the white school. Black community leaders, frustrated that our school was not getting the funding we needed, went before the town council and asked them to enact an additional tax on our community, with all the revenue going directly to our school. The all-white town council readily agreed and enacted a special tax just for the Black community that went to the Black school. Although we paid the same tax as white citizens to support all schools, we were double taxed in order to support our school.
Looking back on my education now, I realized we were taught in a white bubble. All of our teachers were white. When talking with a family, there was much more focus on European ethnic and religious differences than there ever was on race. We were aware, of course, of Blacks in a generic sense, but they simply weren't part of our daily life. I only really came to encounter race in graduate school.
In high school, an English teacher told me I could never understand Shakespeare. I ended up failing that class. The first and only time I failed a class in my entire academic career. I ended up retaking that class the next semester from a different teacher, and I got an A. In order to graduate on time, I had to take an additional class on public speaking. That turned out to be one of the best classes I had in my high school education. The skills that I developed in that class proved to be invaluable to my professional career.
Black males make up about 6.2% of the U.S. population. In 2017, 45% of Black students attended high-poverty schools, compared to 8% for white students. Only 2% of teachers in the U.S. are Black men. In 2018, 19% of Black males held a bachelor's degree, compared to 32% for all men. Gentlemen, what are your recollections of interactions, positive or negative, you have had with people of another race?
While studying at Fisk University in Nashville, Tennessee, I met Alan DeFontenoy, a graduate student at Vanderbilt University. Alain and I would become friends since he was French and we could speak French together. On some weekends, we would hang out, usually with other international students. One day, Alain and his fiancée, Shalene, and I decided that we'd go out for a fast food restaurant near Vanderbilt University to have lunch. Since Shalene was Native American, the restaurant refused to serve us because we were told they did not serve mixed couples. Yes, Nashville was still openly racially segregated. Blacks and whites lived predominantly in different sections of the city. And they, for the most part, did not go to the same churches, and their children did not go to the same schools. In other words, Blacks and whites were separate, but not equal. These events left me disillusioned and bewildered.
Looking back, I realized early on I had no meaningful interaction in interracial relationships or real friendships. My experiences were homogeneous. I lived in a white neighborhood, which wasn't overtly racist. My world had been segregated, and even if I wasn't even aware of that. In college, I remember there were several Blacks in our university choir. On a singing tour, my roommate was a Black guy from Newport News, Virginia. We often stayed in the homes of the families when we toured. We toured near a town where my family lived, and my family all came out to see us. Neither my family nor the folks in the homes where we stayed ever said anything about having a Black person room with me.
In my 88 years, I've had countless interactions with people of other races. As I look back on those experiences, I feel blessed that I have primarily avoided unpleasantness. Without a doubt, there have been numerous subtle racially charged encounters, but nothing as stressful as the potentially disastrous encounter my parents had with the Klan. While in college, I worked part-time at an advertising agency in Boston. On one occasion, I was sent to the Charleston section of the city to deliver some artwork to another agency. When I emerged from the subway, I was chased by a group of white thugs threatening to beat me. I made it safely to my destination, and when it was time for me to leave for my safety, the people at that agency escorted me back to the subway for my return trip.
Please describe a typical conversation about race that you might have with members of your parents' generation, of your generation, of your children's generation.
People in my family have been killed by white people, so my mother knew how dangerous it was. I will never forget, she once asked me, "Why do you hate white people?" I answered, "I don't hate white people. My problem is that I read history. This is what happened here, and that is what happened there. I'm just telling you what happened." It was difficult and painful for my mother to talk about race relations. What's interesting is that she felt explaining American history meant hating white people. One of my mother's chief objectives was that none of her children would ever go to jail. It was a matter of pride for her generation that they could say they never had to go and get one of their children out of jail.
I remember my father complaining about Blacks getting the jobs at the shipyard. As for my own children, as they grew up, we never discussed race except to express our hatred of prejudice.
I had planned to write a book about the dozens of prosperous Black communities that were wiped out by white people. There were so many I had to narrow it down to 10, so I planned to name the book 10 Towns. After doing all of this research, the stories were so heartbreaking, I couldn't work with it anymore. I don't have a lot of hope that things will change. People look for facts to justify beliefs they already have. One of my associates in a book club said once, "This generation is gone. Once it's gone, things will be better." When I saw those young white kids marching in Charlottesville with the tiki torches, I thought, these are not yahoos who are out shooting at targets in the swamps. These are young white people who are going to be in power in 10 or 15 to 20 years. Don't tell me once our generation's gone, we'll be fine. You have a generation of racists coming up right behind them.
I can't remember anyone, certainly not my parents or relatives, making racist comments when I was growing up. I remember in 1968 having a discussion in the study hall about the Nixon-Humphrey debates. One student asked me if we had considered George Wallace. He said that if Wallace was elected, he might go out and get himself a couple of slaves. I didn't say anything, and I should have. I was very uncomfortable about it, but I didn't have the strength of character to say anything, nor did anyone else. In law school, a fellow student referred to blacks with whom he had been attended in high school as niggers. It felt like a punch in the gut because I couldn't believe that someone that I called a friend would say something like that. But again, I didn't argue with him. I didn't defend it. And I have no excuse except to say I just couldn't believe he said it.
Can you give an example, gentlemen, of a time when you felt that you were treated unfairly because of your race?
I'm white. It never happened to me, but in the Air Force, I was serving in Germany in the 80s. And my boss was a very dark-skinned black man. I had a party and I invited him. Another guy, Rex, white guy from South Carolina, became drunk and agitated. He began a tirade that included yelling, "This is the first party with niggers that I've ever been to." His face showed pure hatred. He wanted to physically hurt blacks. His wife managed to get him out of there before he actually did. But Rex made me think that he probably wasn't the only one who thought that way.
3 specific examples of unfair treatment due to racism. Number 1 was after I graduated from undergraduate school, I started a job in my hometown of Greenwood, South Carolina. I wanted to rent an apartment, but the owner told me he would not rent to me because I'm Black. I felt so deflated. Here I was, an educated man, to be treated like that. The second one was I went to an HBCU school because I wanted to go to a school where race would not matter. However, in my history class, I got my first test back, and the white professor asked me if I had written it. He questioned my abilities. Here I thought I was safe from being judged on the basis of race. The third thing was I played football on our team. The white guys took abuse from Black players, and I didn't stand up for them.
I dated a woman of color in New York as a third-year medical student. She was nurse at the hospital where I was a student. I was advised to discontinue this relationship because it would have a negative impact on my ability to get a surgical residency. Another incident I recall was defending a Nigerian orthopedics physician. This was in the 1980s, and the hospital was in Florida that questioned his competency as a physician and tried to remove his medical license. It was apparent to me that the charges against this Nigerian physician were unfounded. I defended him, and the professional harassment charge was dismissed.
Third quarter 2021. Median weekly earnings for black men were $813, or 71.7% of the median for white men, $1,134. White families have the highest level of both median and mean family wealth, $188,200 and $983,400 respectively. Black families' median and mean wealth is less than 15% of that of white families, at $24,100 and $142,500 respectively. Please describe, gentlemen, interactions or experiences with the police that you might have had or observed.
I've had very few direct racial incidents in my life, but there was one that I will never forget. When I was 17, the police pulled me over because of burned out taillight. I was given a warning ticket and was informed that once it was repaired, I needed to take the proof of that repair to the police station. I immediately replaced the light bulb and did as I was told the very next day. At the desk, after explaining why I was there, an officer took the receipt and told me to follow him. Then he locked me up in a cell with no explanation. After my release, 3 hours later, I was angry and wanted to do something about the way I was treated. But after I got home, my father told me to leave it alone. He told me that complaining would only hurt me in the end. After that, I realized I never again wanted to have any interaction with the police. To this day, I'm still nervous whenever I have to talk to a police officer.
I can recall two negative interactions with the police. One where I was excessively harassed after rolling through a stop sign, and another when my son was beaten up by an off-duty patrolman. In both instances, the individuals were reprimanded, and in one case, the city of Miami Beach paid reparations. I feel sure that these situations would not have been resolved in this way were I not white in a privileged position.
Growing up, we didn't interact with the police who were all white. They drove through our neighborhoods all slowly glaring at us. They came not to serve, but to intimidate and control. They called us boy. We were taught not to react to that slur. In Atlanta, once at a convenience store, a cop asked me for my driver's license. He told me to smile as I had on the picture. His facial expression told me he was enjoying my compliance, which was not necessary to ID me to my driver's license. In college, my buddies and I went to a store to take back bottles, and the clerk pulled a gun on us. The case went to court, and the judge assumed that I was the one that had pulled the gun.
I've been fortunate enough not to have any directly racist or interactions with the police, but I think now that the fact that Derek Chauvin continued to do what he did for so many years, his arrogance, and even in the face of being recorded, was unbelievable to me. His attitude was, they are not going to do anything to me. Go ahead and take your video. I'm bulletproof because I'm a cop.
More than half of all homicide victims are Black males. Black males make up 1/3 of the population in state and federal prisons. Over 40% of prison inmates with a death sentence are Black males. 62% of juveniles convicted in adult criminal court are Black males. So, gentlemen, were you ever in mostly male settings like the military or sports teams where racial differences were a factor?
When I played football in high school, when we played away games, sometimes we were subjected to racial slurs from the fans and even some of the opposing players. One example of teammate support came at a game in Montgomery, Alabama. Hearing the slurs, our white teammates would let us know, us, the Black players, that they supported us by saying, "We've got your back."
During my time in the Navy, I observed the inequality afforded Blacks in their low-level jobs. While on Liberty, in the servicemen's bar, a Black Marine with a white woman as a date approached a group of white Marines for a cigarette. They refused. Another time, my friends and I noticed several white girls with Black servicemen. We asked them why, and the girls replied that the Black servicemen treated them better than the whites did. We were amazed.
I was in the military. A lot of the people who had almost complete authority over your life were white. Some were Southerners and some were racist. In the military, just like in business, if you're Black, you have to navigate your way through racist situations. If you don't, you'd be fighting every day. Then you got to kill somebody, or somebody's going to kill you, or you're going to end up in jail. That's why it's so wearying on Black people, because we have to be constantly navigating our way through a racist society in order to get along. Where white people don't have to even bother about that.
I was never in the military or did anything much with sports. However, in my early teen years, I was a member of an all-white Boy Scout troop on the west side of Cleveland. One of the other troops there was from the east side of Cleveland and majority Black, Troop 410. Some of my fellow scouts in our troop took to mocking them using an exaggerated Southern drawl, saying, "Troop foe tame." Nobody in the adult leadership ever said anything.
Since the 1970s, the NFL has been using race-based norms. To qualify for a dementia payout, former players must prove that they've suffered from cognitive decline. But the testing is graded on a curve, known as a race norm. And under those race norms, black players are assumed to have started with lower intelligence than white players. That means a black player has to prove a greater amount of cognitive decline in order to get the same payout as a white player. The NFL pledged to end this practice in June 2021. As a wrap-up, gentlemen, please tell us, what are your perceptions of the status of race and equality in your current life?
I don't believe we will see any real change in race relations until this older generation dies out and the next generation rises to take control. They, the young, could be the ones who bring about racial equality. We won't see it in my lifetime, but we can still work to change things. The most important thing we can do is to talk about it. Race to me is the human race. Why is the color of my skin important? The only way things will change is for everyone to be involved in the solution. We need white people to say enough is enough. Black people can't do it alone. White people have to be just as committed as people of color.
I had not thought seriously about reparations, but a recommendation that I read a book entitled Good Troubles has opened a whole different perspective for me. I'm very discouraged culturally, nationally, and politically. One ray of hope has been the conversations with President Obama about toxic masculinity, which in my view is actually just white supremacy acted out.
Race relations will get better when people our age die out. We're part of the problem because of lack of trust and fear of losing power. I see less hate in my children's generation. My children's generation have had more race and culture exposure to each other as early as daycare, pre-K, and formative school years. So racial equality is a goal that we have to work toward. It's unacceptable to accept anything less. I'm encouraged by the open dialogue that we are experiencing in the moment. Widespread media coverage and forced dialogue will contribute to incremental advances. It's unfortunate that dialogue is preceded by tragedies like the killing of George Floyd. Change is often painful and rarely happens without tension.
It's equal protection under the law. It's respect for one another, and it's dialogue. It's understanding. We're going to have different points of view, and I can accept that. But at least we can try to understand that point of view. I don't think we're doing a good job of that in most cases today.
Thank you, gentlemen, for reading these vignettes. Now, to conclude, here's a question for each of you to answer personally. How has your participation in this project challenged you to engage with the problems of systemic racism? Rick?
Some of the comments you've just heard indicate that the problem will be resolved when a whole generation dies off and the next generation rises to take control, to become leaders of our society. That sounds like a response that I've heard all my life. Don't worry, it'll happen. These things just take time. Well, let me ask, whose time? Who has to continue to have the talk with their children about how to survive an encounter with the police? Who must continue to accept second-class customer service? Who must walk on eggshells every time they leave the comfort and security of their home? As I see it, you're either a part of the problem or a part of the solution. There is no in between. Which one are you?
Dean?
For myself, participating in this project has helped me come to a conclusion not unlike Rick's, which is that in this long story of struggle, if I'm to be part of it, I want to be a protagonist. I want to be a force for good. And that does mean getting involved, and that does mean taking a side. And I've decided to do just that.
Jerry?
My reason for engaging in this project is that I'm convinced that great numbers of people who desire to see an end to racism and bigotry in our society and contribute toward that goal have less than a clear understanding of the nature and extent of racism in their own personal lives, in the lives of their community, and in the larger institutions in which we all engage. That is government, education, religious, social, financial, industrial, etc., those kind of institutions. My hope is that this project will help to clarify both the personal and societal negative impact racism has on all people and the nation. We must clearly understand the nature of the problems if we seek to resolve them. If this presentation promotes information, discussion, awareness, historical accuracy, and/or movements toward racial reconciliation and justice, I'm convinced it will be worthwhile. What is your response to these experiences?
Phil?
I thought that I was enlightened and informed about the state of racial equality, or more precisely, the lack of it. But these dialogues took me into the lives of my Black friends, and I got to see things from their point of view in ways that I otherwise couldn't have. So what will I do going forward? Certainly, I'll speak up forcefully whenever I encounter injustice. I'll support, with my time and my checkbook, groups like this one, who have specific plans to address racial equality and justice. And I'll urge my friends, both Black and white, to do the same. I missed the civil rights protests of the 60s. I was busy studying chemistry instead. But if a new round of protests get organized now, I'll be there.
Thank you for watching our production.
We hope that you've learned from them.
We now present you, the audience, with a challenge.
What will you do?
There is no time for complacency or indifference. Sit in, stand up, be fierce, be stubborn. We must do the work.
Ba-do, 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 ba-do.